The following presentation is part of the Beyond the Blast Doors network. You're listening to Around the Galaxy.
This is Pete Fletzer. On this episode of Around the Galaxy, we're going to talk to the author of the novelization of The Last Jedi, Mr. Jason Fry. Join us as we talk about working with the Star Wars Story Group, his thoughts on Reylo, and take a deep dive into the now famous Skywalker dream sequence. So strap yourselves in, relax, and enjoy this journey around the galaxy. Welcome to episode number 14 of Around the Galaxy, the Star Wars fan talk show. I am your host, Pete Fletzer. You know, I get the opportunity with this podcast to talk to some really interesting people and get different perspectives. And so far, we've spoken to a bunch of people who've covered this Star Wars world, and today we have the opportunity to speak to somebody who's actually a creator in that Star Wars world. We're talking to Jason Fry. Jason has over 40 writing credits in the Star Wars universe, but the one that you may be most familiar with is he wrote the novelization for The Last Jedi. So we took the opportunity over this next hour plus to dig into that process and understand how he worked with Rian Johnson, how he worked with the story group, and what the thought process was even behind that now famous prologue, and gain some insight on the now famous Skywalker dream sequence. And Reylo fans, we didn't forget about you. I took some time to ask him about his perspective on Reylo, and who better to hear it from than the man that wrote the Last Jedi novelization himself. His perspective is one that you're going to want to hear. Also, stick around for the 10 questions at the end. I promise you, you will never look at your favorite golden droid the same again. Follow us on Twitter at ATGcast. We are always talking Star Wars. We're letting you know about when our next episodes are coming out and who's coming up, and just continuing that conversation about the galaxy far, far away. But why don't we get involved with the interview and get to that right now? Jason, thank you so much for joining me today. How you doing?
I'm good. Thanks for having me on. I really appreciate it.
Oh, it's my pleasure, very much so. So, hey, why don't we sort of get started? One of the things that I seem to have noticed about people who've been involved in Star Wars, whether it's through whether it's writers or anything like that, they seem to have started as a Star Wars fan first. So how were you introduced to Star Wars?
Oh, that one's easy. I had just turned 8 years old when the original Star Wars hit theaters, which was just absolutely the perfect age. And what was interesting for me was even at that age, I knew I wanted to be a writer. I knew I wanted to be a storyteller. I had, already tried my hand at writing little stories on my own. And so Star Wars was right up my alley in so many ways, but I had never imagined there were stories like that. I mean, it was really exciting, but there were depths to it. You could sense that that there was more going on with explorations of heroism and family and legacies and stuff like that. And I mean, did I know all that? Could I articulate that at 8? No, of course not. But just by reading so many stories, I think we get pretty sophisticated, more sophisticated than we might guess earlier than we might think just by taking those in. So I like to say by the time I saw the engines of Darth Vader's Star Destroyer, like, my life was different. Like, my horizons had been kind of exploded, which was awesome. And I stayed a fan throughout, and then was just lucky enough to be able to, as a professional writer, be able to take something I'd always loved and get to dabble in it creatively as well.
It is kind of amazing how there's something about this saga, the Star Wars stories, and you could even go into, I think, the television shows and the books and everything about it, that there's something about it that grabs kids so early, and it grabs, you start there as a kid, but it grabs early, and it probably has something to do with that sort of natural storytelling, that innate sort of history of myth, I guess, in a way.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, George Lucas has talked a lot about Joseph Campbell, et cetera, and that's all there. But I also think that I mean, it's, I think, a bit more self-conscious than how he probably looked at it originally. I mean, he just grew up on Westerns and serials and samurai movies and everything else, and just kind of put it in this wonderful kind of storytelling pop culture blender. And yeah, he just has a really good eye and ear for those sort of things. And you know, wound up telling stories that he wanted to hear based on, you know, bits and pieces that had spoken to him. And I don't know, it's kind of, you know, in a way, it was kind of almost remix culture before we even had that term.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's essentially what all art is, one way or another. I mean, it's our, you know, all these things that have moved us and that have influenced us, and we kind of throw them into the blender with our own personal experiences and hope that something comes out that somebody else will find compelling.
That's a great way to put it. So, you know, how did you have, to your credit, what is it? I tried to count it, but it was very long. Something like 40 pieces of Star Wars credits, right? Do you happen to know?
Yeah, I should keep checking, because I mean, sometimes the number gets out of date and I'm like, oh, but I think it's more than 40 books and short stories. Which is awesome. I once had this brief fantasy. I figured out I had passed Jude Watson, the wonderful Jedi apprentice writer. And I briefly, for a moment, I was like, do I maybe have more credits than anyone else? And I was like, oh, that'd be really cool. So I started digging. And no, Ryder Wyndham, my good friend Ryder Wyndham, has me beat by easily like 20 or 30. So... Not yet. Still a ways to go. But yeah, it's been a lot, and all of them have been such a blast. I'm incredibly lucky. That's the thing to remember even when I'm, you know, touting a number.
Right. Yeah. The number is not as important, but it is impressive, and it's been a long running career. It looks like it started way back. Maybe tell me a little bit about how did you come to become a writer for the Star Wars universe?
It was actually through some friends of mine. I was friends with Dan Wallace, dating back all the way to the old AOL Star Wars message board days.
Oh my gosh.
Which is really, really ancient history.
That's back when I was doing it, yeah.
Yeah, and Dan and I were both big Star Wars geography dorks. Like, we wanted to know how all these planets fit together. And so I remember I was keeping this database of planets. I want to say it was Excel, but I mean, maybe it was just graph paper or something, you know, horrible before then. And I heard Dan was working on the Essential Guide to Planets and Moons, part of that original kind of first generation Del Rey Essential Guides. Yeah. And I thought that was the coolest project, and I kind of wanted to give him my database, but I also was worried he'd feel like I was kind of stepping on his turf. Right. So I kind of held on to it till after the book was done, and then for some reason was like, oh, you know, hey, I made this thing. And he was like, why didn't you give me this months ago? This would have saved me so much work. And I was like, sorry. So after that, we would just kind of consult back and forth a little bit. And he helped out with when they finally decided to do a Star Wars map for the Vector Prime book. Wow. That one came with that kind of treasure style map. Mm-hmm. Etc. And we became friends entirely online at first. We actually didn't meet till after the Essential Atlas came out, which is interesting. And we talked about doing something for the old Star Wars Adventure Journal from West End Games, which had cool things, but also had fiction in it and other things like that. And I actually, through that, I met Craig Carey, who was one of the editors there, who's a really, really awesome guy. Yeah. And Dan and I pitched some stuff to Craig, and I actually got approved by Lucasfilm as part of that. And Dan and I were like cooking up something really cool. And then West End Games, which you know this ancient history, but a lot of fans don't. Which was actually kind of like a shoe company that did gaming on the side, or something really weird.
Yeah, it was a weird sort of connection. I remember.
Yeah, they got in financial trouble, and so the Adventure Journal went poof before I ever got to write for it. And I remember I was just horrified. I was so bummed, because I thought, that was my chance to contribute something to Star Wars, and it was right there in my hand, and then it just turned to nothing.
The amazing thing about that, Jason, is that you and I were probably being reviewed, and we probably would have ended up in the same edition, because I had a story that was being reviewed, and actually I have the approval letter and I have the full story sitting in a manila envelope, and they went out of the Star Wars business. Like you said, it was like literally overnight. There was no warning, and so my story sat. But that's at least you kept going forward. That's good.
Oh, that hurts. That hurt. Yeah, I didn't get that far, but I don't need to tell you about that feeling of heartbreak. You got to be kidding me. It's funny. Years later, when we were putting together the Atlas, Craig Carey shared some West End Games stuff with us that we could mine for planets. Like they were going to do a corporate sector box set at some point. And there had been a corporate sector map had been created kind of freehand for that, which he passed along to us for us so we could, see what they'd had in mind for the Atlas. And I remember as part of that, he gave me some rough layouts for some of the Adventure Journals. So I have to go back and look at those. Maybe your story's in there. Anyway, wow, that's amazing. So we're both survivors of of having our hearts ripped out by the Adventure Journal, and here we are still plugging along.
And we're still doing things. Yep. So from there, you then, what was the first piece that you got published for Star Wars?
Oh wow, I remember it was Dan and Craig and I started writing some things for Star Wars Gamer, which ran very briefly for a year or so under Wizards of the Coast. And we did a bunch of kind of deep dives into Star Wars species. So our first ever thing was about the Anks or the Anks, those big kind of sail fin-headed dinosaur-looking dudes from Episode 1. Oh, okay. So that was my first thing, and I got to make up a planet for them and some stuff, and I was so excited. I remember I got my wife and I went to the River Cafe to celebrate, which is actually this really expensive restaurant here in Brooklyn. It seems a little funny looking back now, but it really shouldn't be. I mean, that's the risk of getting jaded. I was just, having loved Star Wars for so long, to actually, have a little bit of lore that I'd kind of added to the sandbox for someone to use just blew me away. I couldn't believe I could be so lucky, and it's a feeling I've never lost, even doing stuff beyond magazine stuff, etc. That really is part of what makes Star Wars, so much fun as a creator. Is it is just this amazing sandbox, and for the most part, when you get to play in it, you understand the rules. That you can't say this is my toy, no one else can have it. Right. It's going to be passed around and shared, but it's amazing not only to get to tell stories in that, but then to see people pick up something you introduced and run with it and do really cool things with it. It's just it's always just such a blast to see that happen. That's
super interesting. So maybe tell me a little bit about the working with the Star Wars story group, because that is something that came along about halfway through, I think, your tenure as a contributing writer to all things Star Wars. Tell me about when the story group sort of kicked in and how that might have affected, and maybe even tell me a little bit about what it's like to work with that group as a writer.
Oh yeah, the story group. Wow, it's I think remember in Clone Wars where Ahsoka gets kicked out of the Jedi and she's in a kind of star chamber with them all staring down at her. Yeah. I get the impression people think that's what the story group is like.
But you go before a parole board, or
that it's super mysterious, and there's some fortress where they all but no, it's not like that at all.
It's not? Oh my God. Well, I think you just shattered a lot of people's impressions. You just...
I know. We had a lunch meeting once. We got like raps. It really wasn't that extraordinary. No, they're really, they're just super nice folks. But what people think that they're kind of continuity cops or stuff like that, and that's not what they do at all. It's right there in the name of the group. It's story group. It's not continuity group. They're big Star Wars fans who are also just really, really good at storytelling and have thought about it a whole lot. And the vast majority of notes you'll get from story group is really about that. It's about, looking at the story you're trying to tell and suggestions to strengthen it so you can tell it better. I mean, that's the vast majority of it. And sometimes people are a little disappointed to hear that because it makes it seem so much less mysterious, but yeah, that's what they do. Now that said, the fun part of it is, of course, an important part of what they do is they have a broader landscape of upcoming storytelling, etc. And so, sometimes you'll be warned away or steered away from something, but not very often, really. The creators are given a lot of latitude, but what will happen occasionally, which is really fun, is there'll be a note like, hey, you could reference this or put this X way, and that might be useful later. And those are really fun because, it's like being given like mysterious seeds to plant in your backyard, and then months later or years later, etc., like something really cool pops up, and you're like, oh, that's what that was. A real minor example. When I was working on Moving Target, which is a middle grade book I wrote with Cecil Castellucci about Princess Leia, they suggested a little line with one of the rebel operatives talking about I've done things, something like I've done things I'm not proud of. I was taught by hard people to keep people safe or something like that. Mm-hmm. And I'm mangling a line from my own book, but there you go. And I was like, okay, I can do that. And then when I saw Rogue One, I was like, oh, it fit perfectly with Cassian's speech right before they go to Scarif. So that's really fun, like those interesting little connections that you can play a role in, even sometimes if you don't know where it's headed.
Have you ever submitted something and they were like, absolutely not, we can't go that direction?
No, but I mean, I kind of know how to color within the lines. Like I know better than to be like, let's do something on Yoda's species.
Right.
That's not going to fly. So no, but I mean, there really isn't that much steering away in that regard. And sometimes for most things, it's kind of like, well, that's an area we're not really ready to explore yet. But cool. That's that can be a little disappointing sometimes as a creator, but as a fan, I get it, and seeing how the saga's unfolded, it just means I kind of think to myself, well, I'm not going anywhere as a fan, and hopefully not as a storyteller. So you wait and see how things unfold, and often that suggests even better stories.
Right? Maybe they'll let you go back there or something. That's great.
Yeah, maybe.
So you are, of course, I think the most high-profile, I would say, project you worked on was, of course, the novelization of The Last Jedi. How did that process happen? How were you approached on that?
I don't remember exactly when I was, when I was offered it, but one thing that was interesting was it was way before the announcement. Which was at Comic-Con. So, the biggest thing was just kind of keeping my mouth shut, which is a really important part of writing Star Wars, which was, true under Lucasfilm, true under Disney, et cetera. But yeah, that was kind of amazing. Like having this cool thing that made me so happy, but not being able to tell anyone for a very long time. But I went out to California. I want to say it was July before the movie came out. I went out to Skywalker Ranch with Jen Heddle and Mike Siglain of publishing and Pablo Hidalgo of Story Group, and we sat down with Ryan Johnson, who was just finishing up sound on the movie. He was almost done, but he wasn't quite done. And Ryan very generously walked me through, I had read the script, but he walked me through deleted scenes. We talked character arcs and motivations, things like that. And he did a couple things right off the bat that were just enormously kind and generous and really, really helpful for the start of a project. He gave me carte blanche to read all the previous iterations of the script. And, that if there was anything that I thought I could use in the novelization, I could go for it. And I mean, that was really great. And,
yeah, that's a great clean slate to work from. That's amazing.
And not something he had to do, and something he would have been well within his rights to be very protective about. But he was very generous in letting me kind of mine that for interesting material. The other thing he did, which has really become a kind of a commandment for me, not just for Star Wars, but for any writing. I should like take a needlepoint and make a pillow or something. He said, the look in The Last Jedi, there were, all these kind of fateful events, and sometimes there's dark stuff, etc. But he said he always tried to leaven that really quickly within a couple scenes with something that was more kind of that kind of Flash Gordon feel of Star Wars that the movies always need. Right. And he called that lift, not drag. That was his phrase for it. And I thought that was just great advice for any storytelling. And I've made that kind of one of my commandments for everything is, lift, not drag. Figure out how you can kind of give the reader time to rest or a bit of fun, etc. Even if you're telling a story that's pretty weighty and goes dark places. And so, we went from there. That was super nice of him. And he very kindly was like, if you need anything, email me, which I don't think I ever did for a couple of reasons. One was that, one thing you really need on a project like this is a sense of being in the characters' heads. Like that's something a novelization can do that's really hard on screen. But his script was very good and very helpful at tracking where characters were emotionally and how they were reacting to things, which is in a way that a lot of scripts don't do. So I actually had a lot of what I would have wound up asking about. And the other part of it, I was like, the man just finished shooting a Star Wars movie. For goodness sake. Like, I was like, leave him alone. Like, the last thing he needs is some needy writer, like, emailing him about minutia. I was like, let the man lie on a beach and just do nothing for a while.
Right. How many toes do the caretakers have? Just let it go.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So I mostly let him alone. But, it was a blast. And, and the novelization was pretty well received. I think it's interesting. It's a movie that obviously there is some difference of opinion on, perhaps we should say, but, it was it's been very interesting talking to people who are not fans of the movie about the novelization. One thing that comes up from time to time is they'll tell me, I didn't like the movie, and they'll get certain things off their chest, and then they'll kind of say, well, but your novelization fixed it. And I was kind of thinking to myself, well, it's Ryan's story. It's the same story. Like, I didn't do anything. And what I think is going on there for a lot of people is actually they got what is, absolutely kind of a confounding, challenging movie. I mean, I think that's not a controversial statement. And, the novelization was another way into the story for them, and one that let them kind of bargain with themselves and sometimes come out in a different place. Yeah. And you know what? That's awesome. That's kind of something a novelization should do. And that's great. So, but it's always interesting to hear where people are coming from and kind of where they're, how they're approaching something like that. But I mean, that's the key is for me. And it was a lesson I taught myself really early in that project. I was like, this is Ryan's story. I mean, he's not just the director, but the writer too. And I kind of looked at it as, Ryan would write this if he weren't insanely busy making a Star Wars movie. And, from the very beginning, I was like, this is a great honor and it's going to be a lot of fun, but this is not about you. This is serving somebody else's story, and that's job one.
Right. Well, and you said it, and you're not wrong in that it has been a controversial film. I mean, that's the understatement of the year, probably right there. But I walked out of the movie, and I've said this before, and I turned to my friend who I went with. I said that was both the best and worst Star Wars movie I ever saw, and it's become my top three in my top three Star Wars films, because it was just like you said. It's a very different type of story. My challenge, though, and I'd love your opinion or your thoughts, is, it is the movie. I think fans who weren't happy with Disney, etc., on Star Wars, they felt it a little bit on The Force Awakens, but they didn't go all in. But it seems like they pushed all the chips in on The Last Jedi, and it sort of created this sort of very vocal, very small minority of fans that seem to be creating this current among the fan base. How does that? What's your opinion of that? And how does that affect you as being so close to the story? As you said, it's Ryan's story, but you had a hand in bringing it to the people in one way or another.
There's a lot there. I mean, to start with kind of the biggest thing, I think it's a fundamental right we all deserve to like what we like and not like what we don't like.
Right. Yep.
Hands down, there are folks who, I don't argue with folks who don't like TLJ. I don't necessarily like high five with people who do. Like, everybody is entitled to their own opinion, and our reactions to art are very different, and our reactions to stories that are part of a larger story we have loved all our lives are really different. So, all that is great, whether that means you love something or not so much. One thing, it was funny. I was surprised by some of the initial backlash, but then I remembered something which I had kind of that I had forgotten a little bit, which was, when I first read the Last Jedi script, which was, it was for various studios of mine. It was a long time, even before that project. I had kind of needed to sit with it a bit and process it and think about it. And that took me a little while. Right. And I remembered that and thought to myself, it's a challenging, confounding story, and you got to give people some time on it. And that if I had needed that, it's certainly only fair to give other people that. It was interesting. The novelization, this was the first time a Star Wars novelization was published, not with the theatrical release, but actually with the Blu-ray. And initially, I'll be honest, I wasn't super happy about that, because, it's, as a writer, it's going to cost you a little exposure and a little bit of that, best-selling rank fervor that we all want if we're writers. But I thought that actually wound up turning out to be a really good thing, because for that movie, it was actually kind of the perfect time for people to have sat with it a little bit and have a chance to come back to it. So I wound up being really happy about that, which is nice. But what I would say about The Last Jedi is, people can like it or not like it. That is absolutely their right, and that's I think a pretty fundamental right. But the way I look at it is that, yes, as I've said a couple times, it is a challenging, confounding story. Luke's line, "This is not going to go how you think," is absolutely sums up the movie. But I think where I wind up differing from some people who don't like the movie is that, yes, it is kind of a deconstruction of how we think of heroism, etc. But at the end, for me, it's ultimately a reaffirmation of it. And the part I just love that has stuck with me above all else is, Luke says dismissively, "You think I'm going to go out to face down the First Order with a laser sword?" And in the end, that's exactly what he does, right? Which I think is just kind of an amazing transformation.
Yeah, I think it's also for a Star Wars movie, for what is at its most glossy, basic level, it's that's what makes Star Wars great, is that it's got so many different levels you can take it for. And if you're not willing, that's the wrong way to put it. if you're not expecting to have to look at things like, why did all the heroes in this movie and even the villains have so many failures? That's not what you expect to see in a Star Wars film. I mean, every one of them had where the story moved on despite their failures and their decisions that didn't go the way they, as Luke said, it's not going to go the way you want or you think. So I think that leads a little bit to it as well. When you want, one of the criticisms that I spoke to somebody about of the prequels, which I've had a sort of love-hate relationship, and I now am back in the love side and really fully appreciate what they've done for the story. But one of the comments I thought was great was, during the prequels, nobody was having fun, right? So, yeah. Whereas, and I think when you get to The Last Jedi and The Force Awakens, you're sort of revisiting that sort of more quote unquote original Star Wars feel to a degree, but you definitely you're dealing with characters that aren't winning at every turn, and it's not your traditional hero's journey, I guess.
Yeah, and it's also a middle chapter. That's something that's easy to forget. And one of the things I admire about it is it really leans into kind of the static and friction of being a middle chapter. I mean, it is all about complications and failure and reversals. Yep. But as with all middle chapters, we can't really assess it until we've seen how it concludes, which is actually somehow not all that far away now. So, I think this will be, look, in certain segments of the fandom, and in there, it's a divisive, unpleasant conversation. I have just arranged things so that I don't have those conversations because life is too short. But, with that very, very small subset aside, I think this is going to be an interesting conversation to have next January and in 5-10 years down the line. I mean, it's going to be a fascinating thing to see how our sense of this movie changes as the saga and the other Star Wars storytelling grows.
Yeah, I also think that the fact that we live in this age of the internet where anybody can yell as loud as they want and log off does not help. I mean, for fun, I put on my website a review of The Empire Strikes Back if it was released today, and that probably would have been abused as a movie, right? It was, so, and you're right. The middle chapter, by its very nature, needs to be setting up the friction, and then you have to end it before you resolve it, and so it's an uncomfortable place for a lot of people, certainly.
Yeah, the other thing about the internet that drives me crazy. There are going to be people who want to have unpleasant interactions. That just happens, but we have not been helped by the pressure to immediately have an opinion and then defend it to death. I find it very refreshing to try on Twitter or whatever. Try saying the things that seem anathema to Twitter but are really helpful. Try saying, I don't know, or I need to think about that, or I change my mind. I mean, you do it, and actually you're not hit by lightning and the sky doesn't fall. And it's just, we're allowed to do that. You're allowed to need some time to think about it or even change your mind. But, your podcast on internet discourse would be much more complicated and probably less fun. So I'll spare you more.
We'll get to that another day. One of the things that I think stands out about your novel, it's a really, really well done novel. And I there's two places to go. I would love to talk a little bit about the connections to other stories that both you wrote and others did. But I think the thing that I think got the most buzz as it was released was that prologue, that Luke Skywalker dream sequence, which I think is really interesting. And I guess my primary question on that is, how closely did you work with Ryan on that, and where did that idea come from, and how did that come to be?
That was all me. I'll tell you the genesis of the idea, and then I'll tell you why I thought it worked there, which are related things that I certainly hope reinforce each other in a way that makes sense. The idea actually goes back years. It's an idea I had never been able to get out of my head, of this kind of quiet apocalypse of Luke who didn't leave home and, on the surface has this sort of tranquil life, etc. But the more you dig into what's going on in the galaxy around him, you realize that this is a disaster, that he, has missed his destiny, has missed his calling, and the consequences of that are profound and are awful. And I really liked that as a very short story, but I could never figure out why it existed. Like, what was it? Like, there wasn't that kind of what if narrative anywhere. And so I couldn't ever figure out a place that it fit. Then we got to Last Jedi, and I was thinking through some of the narrative challenges of Luke as a character. As I said before, you're telling the story of the movie, and there certainly are things you can do in a novelization that add to that movie, etc. But you have to be true to that mission, or you're not doing your job. And the Last Jedi is not told from Luke's point of view. It's told from Rey's point of view. Right. And Luke is this riddle that she's trying to solve and that she finds incredibly frustrating. And so what that meant was that I really couldn't be in Luke's head until really pretty late in the story. You had to essentially kind of sit on Rey's shoulder to be true to what the movie was doing. And I thought about that, but like everybody else, I've been dying to know what Luke was up to since Return of the Jedi. And I wanted little glimpses of that, and I wanted a sense of him before we plunged into that mystery. And so the other thing that I really tried to do in the book was to really kind of develop the Force almost as a character in its own right. That so many characters, whether it's Rey, whether it's Luke, Kylo, Snoke, have these kind of interactions with the Force, almost arguments with it, and with it are almost part of a larger conversation. And so I really wanted that sense of the Force. And we see it in the movie in that kind of the Rey's kind of ecstatic vision sequence and other times. So I was thinking about Luke and the Force, and the Force, definitely has a will, right? And there's no way it's going to accept that Luke Skywalker has gone off and shut himself away from it and won't listen to its call, and so it's going to try to get to him somehow. And, from there, I realized, when are we at our most open, our most vulnerable, our most suggestible? It's in dreams. And that really just suddenly, there it unlocked. And so I realized that that idea I'd been kicking around kind of forever about a quiet apocalypse on Tatooine actually worked really well for that. That, this is the Force giving Luke a vision of an alternate timeline where he never left home, and the galaxy is been plunged into evil, and people are suffering because he's sat it out. And it's essentially telling him, you've done the exact same thing here. You're making a mistake. And so there it came together, and I was able to not only take this idea that I had never been to get out of my head and actually use it, but use it in a way that I think reinforces and deepens Ryan's story. At least I hope so.
And how did Ryan react to that chapter?
I don't know. We've actually never discussed it. I hope he liked it. He's horrified to find out he hated it. Another part of that also is, it did give me a really killer first line that I knew would make a lot of people be like, what? I tried to get them to let me read the first line at New York Comic Con, just because I figured everybody would assume I was kidding.
Just to hang it out there, right?
Yeah, and then they'd find out, months later that I wasn't kidding. But no, that didn't fly. The only bummer was that, the book leaked like a week early because, some bookseller, people never pay attention to the sell date on the carton. Right. Somebody put up picture of the first page on Reddit, and everything went crazy, and that was a bad week because I was told, no, you will not interact with this until the sell date. Just keep your mouth shut. And so I just sat there in frustration as a billion clickbait articles were launched, but that's life in the 2010s.
Right. Well, it certainly probably drove interest in the story in the book. So that plus there, got to look for the bright side.
First line that stirs some stuff up, to quote my pal Daniel Jose Older, is never a bad thing.
So when you're writing the novel adaptation, which scene in the movie that was in the movie itself, not the cut scenes or anything like that, which scene do you think was the most important for you to bring to life or expand and give a different perspective on?
Oh, that's an interesting question. God, there's a lot of ways I could go to that. I mean, for emotional impact, it was definitely, it had to be Luke passing into the Force. Because, for someone who's been a Luke Skywalker fan and watched those adventures since he was 8 years old, to write that was kind of incredible. What was interesting of that, I wrote the novel. I wrote the novelization with this Excel sheet where I listed all the scenes and the story beats, including ones we wanted to, add just for this. And, I write chronologically. I can't skip around. My brain just won't do that. So I knew I had this really, I just knew without looking like how many scenes away I was from that scene, because it was such an enormous scene in terms of emotion and power in the story, that I knew exactly where I was. And I was kind of not dreading it, but I knew like that scene had to work. And so I knew that was going to be a big day when I got to it. And then I got to it and was in and out of that scene in like 10 minutes. I was done. I wrote it and I was like, and I looked at it and I was like, no, it seems pretty good. And I realized later that what had happened was that I'd been kind of subconsciously working on that scene and how I wanted to handle it the entire time. Like the elves in the engine room had been, working away on it. So actually, when I got to it, I knew exactly what I wanted to do and just did it. And it was actually simple. So that was interesting. The biggest challenge for the novelization, though, was something else. It was that, The Last Jedi uses the visual language of film storytelling in some really interesting ways. Right. And some of that was really difficult to translate to the book. The obvious one is the 3 kind of Rashomon scenes with Luke and Kylo and what happened. Yep. But, I had a handle early on how to do that. And if you look at those 3 scenes, like the sentence structure, the language is deliberately parallel and very, very close to make the differences more apparent. That's, I won't claim that was any kind of genius. Like that was I think obviously the right way to approach it, and it worked. But there's a much harder moment. If in the movie, Rey has her vision in the mirror cave. Yep. And then we get this voiceover where she's, explaining it. And then the shock is seeing that she's telling Kylo. Right. But if you think about that, that's entirely the language of film. Like we know what a voiceover means. We know we've advanced in time. We know somebody's telling this to somebody else. And then it's a visual switcheroo. Oh, it's not Luke, it's Kylo. Wow, right. That's big, that's huge, that's new. But if you think about that, all of that is visual. And I thought to myself, how in the world am I going to do that on the page? Because I don't have that toolkit. Right. And that was a hard one. I got to that scene and stopped and had no idea how to progress and spent like a day and a half walking around muttering before I figured it out.
Yeah, that's the kind of scene I think where if it was written as a novel that became a book, it would have been more the director's choice, and it probably would have been written differently in the first place. But you're faced, I think, with a unique challenge as novelizing, if that's a word, a movie. You have to try to capture that same moment. That's a really that is a big challenge. So as
I mean, it's always challenging. I mean, you don't have the music, you don't know the pacing, you don't know lighting, you don't know a lot of things that are really pretty important how we experience a story told on screen. Right. But that one was so explicitly about visual storytelling that I really just had to, go back to the foundation and kind of build a different house and hope it worked.
Well, and you said that you had read the script. Had you seen any cut of the movie before you started writing, or?
No.
Okay.
No.
Wow.
I was finished. I had written a full draft without that. They were kind enough to give me a preview screening in November.
Okay.
Where I discovered to my horror that I had not had the actual shooting script, but one a little earlier.
Okay.
And a lot of the kind of sequencing of scenes, if people have may notice that some of the sequencing is different, particularly in the beginning of the story. That's one of the things that had changed. So I saw that in November, but we were already really tight in production. It's funny. There are people out there who really think that I started the novelization at like Christmas, and that the mandate was fix the movie, which, A, the movie didn't need fixing, and B,
right.
No, you can't do that and have a book come out in March. That's just not going to work in any facet of publishing. So I did have a preview, but there, what I was really looking at was, making sure some things fit in terms of tone, et cetera. And so I kind of went back and just did a quick polish based on that. And then was able to do a little polishing even after the movie came out, but we were really up against it. But some of that was fun. Like, it's interesting. I just detest rain. I hate it. And so I wrote the scene of Rey under the Falcon when she has one of her kind of forced Skypes with Kylo, as her like huddled miserably in the rain under the Falcon.
Right.
And, it had not occurred to me at all that, she's from a desert planet and rain is this amazing novelty. And so that was really fun in that preview screening. Like, there's, Daisy Ridley kind of looking delighted and kind of playing with the rain. And it's such a great character moment and so opposite that I was really happy to go back and rewrite that one. That was a really nice surprise.
That's cool. Those are the kind of things that you would look at very differently, having read the script and dove into the story and then seeing it for the first time. That's pretty cool.
And all credit to Ryan as the director and to Daisy as the actress. Like, they found that moment was a little different, and it was much more interesting and surprising that way.
So there's a lot of talk online about there's the whole Reylo movement, the Kylo and Rey getting together. Where do you come down on that?
I don't ship anybody. The story's the story. I mean, whatever. What I would say is I find that relationship so interesting in that it is so scarily intimate. These are people who have literally been in each other's heads, which is right. Not something any of us can say with any relationship. It's people the analog people reach for is romance, and it's not necessarily that that's wrong, but that is the closest thing we have, and maybe kind of incomplete, perhaps we could say. Like, right. What I love about that relationship is just, I don't know where it's going in 9. I have no idea, but I could see any of the possible outcomes from, redemption, romance, etc., to implacable enemies, only one of whom can move forward. And, all of that could spring logically from this very complicated state that those two characters find themselves in that movie. And honestly, that's I hope that doesn't sound as a weaselly answer. And I also hope people don't take it out of context to advance their shipping wars, which happens sometimes, and which really is not my favorite day when it happens. So please don't do that, people. But the point is that, for me, that's just good storytelling. Like, one reason people kind of fight so hard about this is also that all the outcomes are on the table, and all of them could make logical sense. So we'll see in December, and I can't wait.
Yeah. So what are you looking forward to in episode 9? What's it's a strange question to ask somebody who is so intimately involved in episode 8, but what sort of things are still unanswered for you that you want to see answered?
I hope this isn't too much of an insider's answer, but with all the movies that have come out under the Disney umbrella, I've been working on projects so that I've read the scripts in production before they've come out, etc. And I know nothing about 9. That hasn't happened, and I am not disappointed. It's actually really cool. When I was at Celebration, it was kind of hilarious. I had a signing scheduled opposite the trailer reveal, etc., which me and my publisher were like, wow, this is not going to work. No one is coming to this. And so we just eventually gave up, particularly when they were showing the panel in the big hall. And so I just went around the corner and stood in the back of Del Rey's booth and watched the trailer. And, and it was actually really fun knowing nothing. And being like, oh my God, what does that mean? Was that really the Emperor? Is that Death Star wreckage? I mean, that was all so cool. And so I don't know. I mean, if for various projects I do read it early, that'll obviously be cool. And then I will, of course, keep my mouth shut, which is commitment number 1.
Right.
But if I do go into the theater on opening night unspoiled, that'll also be really awesome.
That's great. So it must be tough for you because you do have so much, I don't want to say access, but certainly insight as to what's coming up. And I'm sure you're working on projects that you can't talk about. But what are you most looking forward to? I mean, there's so much coming out over the next couple of years between The Mandalorian and the Cassian Andor series and the Clone Wars and more movies and things like that. So what's the thing you want to see?
I think one thing that is really interesting is that, with Star Wars storytelling happening in so many media and on so many tracks now, I mean, there's Resistance, or there's Clone Wars again, there's The Mandalorian, there's the One More Saga movie, there's the anthology movies, there's the novels, the comics, gaming, and now immersive reality too. There's so much going on that one thing I find very interesting is that there's an opportunity here to take kind of the various strands of Star Wars and use those and kind of lean on those in more heavily than you would if you were just telling stories through the saga movies. Like, you can make a Western movie. You can make one thing George always said, which I always thought was wise, was that he would point out there's always a segment of Star Wars that wants it to be dark and gritty like Terminator. Mm-hmm. And that's just not what he does. Well, right. I mean, I don't know anything about The Mandalorian either, but it sure looks dark and gritty. And, it's not that George was wrong. It was that he didn't have a vehicle for that. But now, like with so much storytelling, the palette is big enough that you can do that. You can try dark and gritty. You can try various ways of telling a Star Wars story that, obviously they have to still have kind of this foundational Star Wars secret sauce, but you can experiment in ways that, they really couldn't do a generation ago. And to me, that's really, really interesting. And we're only seeing the beginnings of it now. But, it's also something for hopefully to bring some peace to some segments of this fan base. Like if a movie or a project doesn't work for you, there's something else really interesting coming in just a couple of months. Right. And maybe that'll work for you. And, that's great. That's and that's great, not from a customer service standpoint, but just from a storytelling standpoint. I mean, This is, I think back to being a kid and waiting 3 years between Star Wars movies and, reading the monthly Marvel comic and, the newspaper strips, but that was really it.
Yeah.
And now, now there's, with everything going on, this is just a golden age of Star Wars storytelling. And if you could have told my young self that was what was coming, he would be like, I can't believe the world could be so wonderful. And he wouldn't have been wrong.
Well, yeah, it is interesting too, because I think that's the freedom that Disney Plus gives them, right? So I am one of those that loved Solo. I thought Solo was a great movie for various reasons, but one of the things I love most about it was literally Star Wars trying a heist movie, and not in the traditional sense, but all the elements were in there. And I don't think that's why it failed. I think there's more commercial reasons why, and failure is such a bad term for it. It made money, but it wasn't as big as they had wanted. But the great thing I think about Disney Plus is that they can go down those roads, and if it fails, you're still getting your $7 a month from the customers, and
right.
So it's not as big a commercial risk. But and I also think the biggest plus, and it was interesting, we started talking early on about the story group. I think that as a base allows them to ensure that none of these stories are going to get so out of control, and nothing's going to go so far off the rails, but it definitely allows for some experimentation for certain.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, good stewardship, but a lot of experimentation within that. And that's super exciting.
Excellent. So I've been doing this thing sort of, I've been ending every one of my conversations with people who've joined me with a little sort of 10-question Star Wars, not quiz, but sort of personality test, if you will. It's sort of, I'll ask you some questions and you give me your answers. They can be short or long, but just if you don't mind, I'm going to throw you some Star Wars. There's no wrong answers, I think, is the key here.
Oh boy, if there are, I will find them.
Well, it's sort of like,
yeah, let's do it.
Have you ever seen the Behind the Actors Studio or Inside the Actors Studio with James Lipton? Yeah, so those sort of 10 questions, those Bernard Pivot questions, I've sort of Star Wars-ized them, if you will. So cool. Let's see where you come out on these. So, and this, I've never asked somebody who has written one of these, but what's your favorite Star Wars movie, television show, or book? What's your favorite one?
We'll do books since I am an author. It's Han Solo at Star's End by
classic.
Bailey. Oh yeah. It's a wonderful book, and there's so many things I love about it. I think it's one of the fingers on one hand best Han portrayals in the saga, period. Counting the movies with anything. It's not this huge doorstop of a book. You can read it in an afternoon and have a satisfying, fun, breezy story, which is something that sometimes I feel like we've lost a little bit. So that's really welcome. But, most importantly, it's also funny. I think, sometimes Star Wars, partially because, folks like me are understandably so reverential about this material. It means a lot to them, that sometimes Star Wars forgets to be funny. And that book is it's laugh out loud funny, which Star Wars should always be. Yeah.
And I see that as sort of a spiritual brother to Solo. I think not just because it's Han Solo, but I feel like there's a lot of elements that aren't direct callbacks, but certainly of the same ilk.
Yeah, absolutely.
I hate to ask you this one, but the second question is, what is your least favorite Star Wars movie, TV show, or book?
What is my least favorite? Wow.
Usually I'm not asking people who might accidentally name something that they know the person who worked on it or has to work with them again in the future. So
how many movies do we have out now?
There's 10 films,
right?
Yep.
Yeah, well, Attack of the Clones is my 10th favorite Star Wars movie.
Excellent.
I'll put it that way.
Well put. That is the most politically correct answer ever. Well done.
Yeah, well, I'll undermine myself by saying in December, I'm pretty sure it would be my 11th favorite. But anyway, but it's still a favorite.
It's still right. It's your favorite of your ugly children. That's the way. I don't know. Number 3 is: are you an Imperial or Rebel?
Oh, goodness me. I'm just a simple man trying to make my way in the universe, and I'm sticking to that. No, actually, I'm a total wuss about tattoos, though I've wanted one my whole life and never quite pulled the trigger because it's sort of forever. But the first thing I'm going to get is the Imperial spoke on my, unfortunately, rather grossly furry shoulder. But honestly, that's because it's just a really cool symbol. It's not really an ideology thing.
Okay. What's your favorite Star Wars sound effect?
Oh, wow. That's a good one. It's got to be the snap hiss of a lightsaber. I mean, just when you hear that sound, everything kind of stops. It's just become so iconic. But, oh my God, we could do 100 of those. The Stuka bomber, TIE fighter noise, the pew pew. I mean, everything. Let's put it this way: everything Ben Burtt touched is pretty much genius. And,
it's just true.
Still a Star Wars weapon, but yeah, I'll go with the lightsaber sound.
Yeah, I was fortunate. He was my very first interview for Star Wars Galaxy was Ben Burtt.
Oh, wow. That's amazing.
So that was, I went to I don't know if you remember the IMAX film. The film was called Special Effects.
Yeah,
and it was premiered in New Jersey. I'm in Jersey. So I whittled my way into getting to that premiere and did the interview. And that's where Steve and I started working together, which was very cool.
Oh, wow. That's amazing. I'm jealous. He's unbelievable.
It really is, and I love that you said snap hiss because that might have been in those Star Wars comic strips that you were talking about, those or Jackson with the old Star Wars comic book, going old school, which is cool. All right, R2D2 or C-3PO?
Oh, I'm a huge R2 fan, and C-3PO is quietly an incredible monster. He develops systems.
How so?
He will sell everybody out. C-3PO is not a good guy. He doesn't even really mean well. He's a monster.
I've never heurd him referred to as a monster. That's God. Amazing.
In Empire, when he's like, we should surrender to the Empire. Turn around, Chewbacca. I can't see. Never mind that it's your best friend. I can't see. Why are we escaping into hyperspace, R2D2? You're not finished putting my leg back on.
He is kind of an ass. That's really.
Oh my God, it's all about him. He's the only sentient in the entire universe. No, but my favorite 3PO line of all is because it is so 3PO is, when Luke arrives at Jabba's palace and 3PO says, "Master Luke's come to rescue me." No, 3PO is a monster. I will not quit until people see it. He's a lovable monster sometimes, but not really as much as you think once you start looking at it.
Now, did you think that before you had to get into his head for writing Last Jedi, or did that sort of come to you as you're looking at it and saying, geez, he's kind of in this for himself? Oh,
yeah. No, I've been on the 3PO monster campaign for some time. I will say, though, that actually this goes back to Weapon of a Jedi, which I read about Luke and the droids searching for a lost Jedi temple. Like, that was one of my all-time pinch me moments writing Star Wars. I was writing C-3PO dialogue, which is itself kind of amazing. And when I couldn't get a line right, I would close my eyes and I would say it in Anthony Daniels' voice. And that was it never failed. That would let me know if it worked or if it didn't. Could I hear it that way? Which is a testament to Anthony Daniels and the amazing work he had done. And also, I was one of many moments where I was like, I can't believe I actually get to do this.
That's great. Yeah, I think we have to start the hashtag C-3PO is a monster. We got to get people on board there. All right. So what spaceship or vehicle would you most like to own?
Oh, it's the Millennium Falcon, hands down. Yeah. I still cannot believe there actually is a full-size one at Galaxy's Edge. That is just, it may be our greatest cultural advancement as a species. Well, Actually, it's baseball, but that's number 2.
Have you been to Galaxy's Edge yet?
I have not. Not. Yeah, I spent a whole week just dying of jealousy when like everyone I knew in Star Wars was there. But I will get there. Believe me. Have you been?
I have not. No, I'm not. I'm making my plans. I'm going to incorporate it into my Star Wars Celebration 20 visit. It's the other thing. I've never been to a Star Wars Celebration, which is kind of shocking, not only to people I tell, but also to me. But
I'm super.
My kids are excited to go. My wife isn't as thrilled, but I'm excited. So we'll figure it out. But that's I almost feel like I need to put the caveat on that question, because this is like, I don't know, the 14th, 15th interview I've done for the podcast and thrown that in there. And I think all but like 2 people have said the Falcon. So I might need to go for what's your second favorite?
Besides the Millennium Falcon. Yeah, good idea.
Okay. Interesting question again for somebody who had to write a little bit for them. Of these 3, which is your favorite? A Porg, Ewok, or Jar Jar Binks? 3 most divisive creatures, I think, in Star Wars. A
Porg, easily. That was the one thing I allowed myself. People, of course, would try to get Last Jedi stuff out of me. And I was like, nope, that is not happening. What are you insane? That's not going to happen. But there were people who were like, the Porgs are going to ruin the movie. And I was able to be like, the Porgs do not ruin the movie. I will be genuinely shocked if that's what you object to. Porgs forever. I love them, even though I can't make that noise. I've tried. It's terrible, and I'm not going to do it.
All right, I won't make it. And it certainly wasn't your favorite sound effect, which is good. So if you could be any character in the entire Star Wars universe, who would you be and why?
Who would I be and why? I'd say it's got to be Han Solo. I mean, Han Solo was everything I wanted to be as a kid, and kind of already knew I would never be. But I mean, on the other hand, he did get run through by his own son, so it's not the ending I would want. But it's. I'll tell you a quick, hopefully funny story. So when I was offered the job of writing Weapon of a Jedi, I was excited because, I mean, it's great. It's a Star Wars movie, and, Luke's lightsaber duel and all these scenarios I had, done with my Kenner action figures as a kid and enjoyed. But the challenge of it was that fundamentally I'm like a Han guy. I never really quite got Luke.
Right.
So I which turned out to be great because I put myself through what I call Luke boot camp and wound up with an appreciation of the character that I hadn't had before, as well as Mark Hamill's incredibly hard work bringing that character to life. But anyway, I was telling the story at New York Comic Con, and I was sitting next to Greg Rucka, who wrote Smuggler's Run, which is the Han book in that series, in the run up to episode 7. And I was telling the story, and Greg Rucka was sitting next to me, and he kind of cocked an eyebrow, and he looked over. He has this wonderful deep voice, and he grabs the mic and he goes, the funny thing is, I was always a Luke guy and never really got Han. And we were kind of looking at each other, and the moderator was Michael Siglain of the creative director of the publishing at Lucasfilm, and he looked over it and he was like, just in disbelief. He was like, why didn't you two idiots tell somebody? But at the same time, I'm really glad we didn't, because, now I'm still a Han guy and always will be, but I'm also now like a card-carrying member of Team Luke.
Excellent. That's really funny. Original trilogy, prequels, or sequels?
Oh, I'm an original trilogy kid. I mean, I was 8 when A New Hope came out. There was no way I could be anything else. But I love that it's a question, and that everybody has their Star Wars, and I think that's wonderful for the saga and the fan base, and I hope it is always the case.
I think that's one of the greatest things I've learned over all the hours I've done these is that, first of all, I've seen it with my 6-year-old and my 9-year-old that Star Wars now has so many different doors for people to enter between television and books and movies. But it's interesting how many people, I forget, because I saw Star Wars in the theaters when I was a kid before it said episode 4. you forget that the prequels were really an entree to such a big part of the fan base now, and the role it plays is very different for them than it is for you and me, and for and then again for my kids. It's they may look at them and not be as enamored by them because it's not their trilogy. So kind of interesting. So the last on this little questionnaire here is, and by the way, you've gotten all the right answers, so that's good. What's your favorite Star Wars quote?
Favorite Star Wars quote? Wow, that's a good one. Oh, hokey religions and ancient weapons are no match for a good blaster at your side. Star is funny. Remember, Star Wars is supposed to be funny. It's a great character line, and it lets the audience laugh while getting back to the premise that this religion isn't so hokey and the ancient weapon is actually really important.
Yep, that's great. That's a great call. I love that one. That's, just like everybody says the Millennium Falcon, I think I've gotten a different quote from everybody, which is really cool. So so do you have anything on the horizon that you can share with us that you have coming out? I don't know if anything's been announced that you can get us hyped for, or are you in a Star Wars bubble right now that you can't talk about? Or
Yeah, no, I can tell you nothing. I do have one project I'm working on, which is really fun, and which I hope be able to talk about soon. But right now I can't, and hopefully there will be more to come. I've always said that, I just feel incredibly lucky and incredibly grateful that I've gotten to tell stories in the galaxy far, far away. And as long as they will let me, I will happily continue to do that.
Yeah, well, I can safely say that the parts of the universe that you've created have certainly impacted and affected people in a really positive way, and that's the greatest thing I think you can do. So that's fantastic, and thank you for spending some time with us today. Where can people find you online and keep up with you, and you can finally tell us about this great stuff?
I do updates on what I'm up to on my Tumblr, which is Jason Fry's Dorkery. Or you can come find me on Twitter. I'm Jason C. Fry. I'm not Jason Fry. He's a mobile programmer in the UK. He's actually better looking than me and funny and knows a lot about Star Wars. So you should definitely follow him. He's a good guy. But I'm Jason C. Fry, so follow us both.
Excellent. Well, Jason, thank you very much for spending time with us today. This was a lot of fun.
Yeah. No, I had a blast. Thanks so much for having me, and maybe we'll bump into each other at Galaxy's Edge.
I hope so. Thanks. Well, that wraps it up for this episode of Around the Galaxy. Thank you to Jason Fry, and thank you for listening. If you had fun, please subscribe, like, share, rate us at 5 stars, and review it. If you really liked it, please feel free to head on over to our Patreon page at patreon.com/AroundTheGalaxy. Don't forget to follow us on Twitter at ATGcast, and if you or someone you know would make a great guest, please drop us a line. Until next time, this has been Pete Fletzer, and we'll see you for our next trip around the galaxy.
Chewie, get us out of here!
Around the Galaxy is copyright 2019 Pete in the Seat Studios. Our theme music is brought to you courtesy of the band Apollo's Ghost, whose EP is available on iTunes, SoundCloud, Spotify, or wherever you get music.